Hey everybody, Crypto Mentor 99. How you doing? This is my second video on a series of videos I'm doing about Guatemala. The first one that I did was basically an introduction. That'll be in the description box below. This is going to be part two, and it's going to be my process on trying to get dual citizenship. By way of short introduction, for those of you that follow me, you're like, what are you doing videos on Guatemala? I'm not an expert, but I've been there 8 times, and I'm going at the end of January 2020, which will be my 9th trip, and I just wanted to get some information out for the people on YouTube that may be able to benefit by this. For those of you that have never seen me before, I've got a small but growing YouTube channel on cryptocurrencies and investing, but I'm doing a series, maybe 3 or 4, about Guatemala. So let's talk about dual citizenship. I'm always a guy, first of all, I love my country. I love the United States. I vote in every election. I have no problems with the United States government. But I'm also the type of person, I like to have a plan A, I like to have a plan B, and if possible, a plan C in everything that I do. And I'm just a regular guy. Grandfather, I'm in my early 60s, our 3 adult children live here in town. I'm not some crazy guy that lives on the top of a mountain and wants to leave the country for whatever reason, but I just wanted dual citizenship, and I know a ton of people in Guatemala. So here's what you have to do first. Oh, and by full disclosure, I looked on YouTube, and most of the dual citizenship is outdated and old information. I'm like, I'm going to do some up-to-date videos to maybe help someone. So again, part 1, my introduction to Guatemala, description box below. This is going to be part 2. So my story probably starts in 2016. What I'm about to say happened in 2016 and 2017. So the first thing that you need to do if you live in the United States, again, this is specific to people living in the United States. The United States is broken up into certain sections, okay? And the state that I live in, the jurisdiction or the Guatemalan embassy that I needed to go to was in Chicago. Now, if someone lived in the southern part of the United States, I think Houston has a Guatemalan embassy. I think there's one in Washington. There might be one in Florida. I think there's one in San Francisco. You get the point. So you have to Google Guatemalan embassies and find out the one that's in your jurisdiction. Now, here comes the fun part. So I had to drive. It was really difficult for me to communicate, frankly, with the folks in the embassy in Chicago, the Guatemalan embassy, because they're mostly used to probably speaking Spanish with people. And even my emails, it took a few times to exactly tell this person what I was interested in. So I had to drive to Chicago, which I love driving. So I drove to Chicago. I walked in and I said, I'm here to apply for dual citizenship. And they're like, what? And all these people, all these Guatemalans that want to be naturalized citizens in the United States are looking at me like, why do you want to do that? It was actually kind of funny. So I said to the guy, okay, which line do I go in? Because there's a lot of lines, a lot of people. Which line do I go in to be, for my paperwork to be a dual citizenship? The guy's like, over there. Well, there was no line over there. I was the first one in line. Some lady comes out and I'm like, yes, I'd like to have the proper paperwork to be considered for dual citizenship. And she said to me what the first guy said. What? I said, I would like the paperwork to be considered to be a dual citizen. She's like, okay. So she hands me a sheet of paper, which I brought back to Chicago. Now, to my knowledge, that paper they could not mail to you directly. Don't ask me why. Maybe it's changed since 2016 and 2017. That's what I had to do. So luckily, I've got some friends in Chicago. I visited for the weekend, drove back here. So once I had the paperwork, it was quite a lot to fill out, frankly. And I had to get my birth certificate, which, you know, surprise, surprise. I needed to get my marriage. So this was like an information package that I had to get together before I flew down to the main embassy in Guatemala City with all my paperwork. So I had to get my birth certificate, my marriage certificate. I had to have like a federal, and it lists all the addresses on this like bullet sheet that they give you. I had to have a background check, and in my local jurisdiction, I had to have a local law enforcement review or something. And I had to show I was even, I think the number was $2,000 a month. Either I was moving to Guatemala and I had a job or retirement income or whatever. They just, you know, I don't think any country just wants people moving there without a job and without a purpose. That was the easy part. So I just filled out those forms and mailed them off and just had to wait a few weeks. Now, the interesting part is it's not a sponsor. I didn't need to be sponsored by anyone in Guatemala, but I had to have someone vouch for me that they knew me, what my character was, and that I wasn't some felon or something. And my contact in Guatemala had to write a letter saying, you know, I know this person, you know, we're friends of his. And my friend had to say, you know, I'm a business owner. I'm an established resident in Guatemala. Here's my birth certificate. Here's all my paperwork. So then that was sent to me for my friends in Guatemala. And they have to say, yes, I've got a bank account, and not how much money you've got, but so, okay. So now this is a little bit time sensitive. So what I mean is my birth certificate, my marriage certificate, like the FBI background check, the local law enforcement here, and my friend's letter, none of those documents had to be over 60 days old. And you're like, what do you mean? So I couldn't have the documents wait 90 days and then go to Guatemala and show up at the embassy because they would say, well, this is out of date. This is past the due date. It's over 60 days old. So you have to kind of plan ahead. And my birth certificate took about a month. My marriage certificate took about a month. The FBI, or not the FBI, my background check from the government came back relatively quickly. And my local law enforcement was like a week. So once I had all the documents, and then my buddy wrote the letter. So I've got this packet, and it's about, I don't exaggerate, quarter inch, a half inch of documents, right? And my passport, because I got to have that to go to Guatemala. So it's all set. I buy my ticket. I'm like, why am I doing this? I'm doing this because, remember, I have plan A, plan B, plan C. So here comes the bad news. So go to Guatemala, and my friend brings me to the embassy. Tons of people, okay? And, you know, people from all over the world trying to either get a visa, passport, whatever. So I go in there, and of course my friend is speaking Spanish. I'm like, you know, where do I go? I didn't even know where the bathroom was at, you know. I'm like, so we get up in the front of the line, and the guy the guy behind the counter looks at my paperwork, and I'm thinking, I'm going to be in. And I knew that I had to have an interview, maybe not that day, but I was going to tell them, hey, I'm going to be in Guatemala for a week. Can I schedule my in-face or person-to-person interview? So I'm like, okay, I got all my documents. Well, then the guy goes in the back. I'm like, that's never a good sign when you're talking to someone at a counter and they go in back and they talk with their supervisor and then they come back out. Because I said to my friend, what's going on? He's like, well, he went back. He looked at your documents and he went back to talk to a supervisor. I'm like, that can't be good. She's like, I know. So I'm like, I wonder what I did wrong. So the guy comes out with the supervisor, and the supervisor said to me, where did you get this checklist of information? And I said, well, like, I got that in Chicago, Illinois at the embassy. And you know what the guy says to me? It's outdated. We've changed the requirements. They meaning the Guatemalan government. And I'm like, I said, you mean to tell me? I said, just so I understand, and he's speaking Spanish and my friend's translating. I said, you mean this step-by-step checklist that I got in Chicago is out of date? And the guy's like, well, yes, but basically, don't be discouraged. You can reapply. And oh, by the way, do you speak Spanish? And this was all through my friend, not the interpreter, my friend. And I'm like, no. Why? And he's like, well, because the interview that we have with you is in Spanish. And I'm like, no one told me that. And it wasn't on the checklist that I got from the embassy in Guatemala. I'm sorry, in Chicago. I'm like, oh man. So I left pretty flat from the meeting in Guatemala at the embassy in probably the summer of 2017. And had I did the interview, okay, which never happened because I never had the interview, and had I passed, the long and short of it is you basically apply for a temporary residency, and then once you get that, it's only a matter of time before you get your permanent residency. So all that to say, I was like 90% done with the process. And then I found out that, as odd as that sounds, I couldn't believe it. And my friend's like, this is the form they gave you in Chicago? And I'm like, yes, I followed every checklist, number 1, number 2, all the way to number 6 or 7. And they're like, so I said to the guy in Guatemala at the embassy, I'm like, well, can I get the updated list of requirements? And he's like, no, you have to get that from Chicago. I'm like, are you kidding me? Anyhow, so that was my experience. Like it, love it, or if you're indifferent to my dual citizenship journey in one of my favorite countries, Guatemala. So anyhow, all that to say that was 2016, 2017. If anybody has some updated information, I would like to hear it. But for now, that is on hold because I don't really speak Spanish. So for me to do the interview, it would be a short interview because I know like 15 or 20 words in Spanish. So anyhow, maybe that's not the ending of the story that you were thinking. But again, it wasn't anyone's fault per se. And I have no reason why the people in Chicago in the embassy had the outdated information on the requirements for dual citizenship. Anyhow, Crypto Mentor 99, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Me gusta Guatemala.